To me, if you're going to start a brand, like, don't you want to feel good about what you do? But feeling good about what you do is really only like a small portion of why you can succeed in the U.S. or why to make in the U.S. isn't only about jobs. It's not only about labor. There's so many other reasons to do that, and we can go through some of those. But
yeah, definitely.
Some of the other reasons are actually really smart financially for your brand. A big one is minimums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So part of our company's mission, is to reduce waste. And so having a low minimum, we have a 100-piece minimum per style in manufacturing. That is extremely low for the industry. I think probably the average in America would be 600 pieces minimum, which is still fairly low for the industry. But we have a 100-piece minimum, and the reason that we've chosen to do that is it pains me to think somebody's going to make 600 pieces of a style just to meet minimums, but not knowing if they're ever going to sell those 600 pieces. They haven't market tested it yet. Mm-hmm. They haven't, found out if the demand is there yet. So I think 600 pieces is just too much to force someone to order, even though they still have some, market testing to do. Mm-hmm. and demand and proof of concept. You get feedback on your products when they first get out there in the marketplace, mm-hmm. and inevitably you're going to make some changes, right? Yes. So if you're launching a new, let's just go wool vest. Mm-hmm. If you're launching a new wool vest, to make 100 pieces gives you that flexibility to go and test it and be like, my feedback's saying it's a little too short, mm-hmm. in the torso. And people are hoping for a fourth button, mm-hmm. or something like that. And so now you've got this flexibility. You get to make some tweaks to it and then go back in and do another production run, instead of getting stuck with this inventory that you didn't want in the first place because it was just a minimum you had to order. Mm-hmm. So that's, and that's a smart business decision. Like, mm-hmm. Danielle was saying, it's not just a sustainability thing. It's smart. You aren't stuck, your money isn't tied up in this inventory that you might not want anyway, right, in the end.
And it's tempting to order that 600 units though, because, and I can tell you right now, you're going to be tempted to just want to order it because you pay a lot less per unit when you order 600 versus when you order 100 for labor. So you really want to think about your product in terms of material cost and then labor cost. And so when you're ordering more, you're like, ooh, it's $5 less per unit. I can save a lot of money, and I can put that money, towards more units versus just the 100 units. But don't forget to think about your supply chain. So you want to think about, all your materials costs that go into it. You have to have the yarns made, you have to have the fabric made, you have to, have the trims made or ordered. And so there's a lot of money that gets sunk into 5 times as many units than if you made 600 versus if you made 100. So although you're paying more per unit, your overall cost is less. You don't have as much money tied up in an inventory that you don't even know is going to sell, and you have the flexibility, to make those rolling changes for future production runs. Mm-hmm. And everybody makes changes, from big brand to small. We've worked at some really big companies, and in development, and every single time you roll out a new product, you're going to make rolling changes for sure.
Yeah, so there are minimums across the industry. Fabric minimums are there. So a lot of times what I recommend is, if you're in love with the fabric, go ahead and buy, the minimum. It might be, 500 yards or something like that. Mm-hmm. But you only cut that 100, right?
Exactly.
Only cut and sew the 100. And then you've got all this flexibility with the 400 additional yards of that fabric, mm-hmm. to make adjustments once you get it out in the marketplace. So again, just another business advantage to making in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Another one is we're here. Mm-hmm. You can come here and communicate with us. We can have face-to-face meetings. Even if we aren't having face-to-face meetings and we just get on the phone with you, or get on Skype or something like that, the amount of things we can get done with one conversation is, I mean, I used to make overseas for years. The things that I can get done with a client on the phone in 1/2 hour is about what you'd accomplish in 2 weeks of working overseas with, China, let's say, of the back and forth. Their waking hours are different than ours. So you ask a question, then they answer a question. In the night, you get your answer in the morning, and then you realize they didn't understand the question right.
Yeah.
So then you ask another question, and then you get your answer in the night, and this kind of goes on and on. And you can stay up at midnight, which I've done several nights of, and try and communicate with them. But the language barriers, the cultural differences, all that stuff. So I really truly believe what you can get done in a 1/2 hour, working business to business in the U.S. is about 2 weeks of working overseas of work. And I mean, I've seen it time and time again.
And that 2 weeks could be for a really simple garment. I mean, when you're developing something that is complex, or it's meeting a certain market need, or you're really building it for that longevity. Overseas factories are really meant to just take orders. They help you do some development, and there's some good people, but they're really just meant to accept your order that you give them. And if you're really seeking a good development partner that can make you great suggestions and really kind of tell you what your decisions are going to mean in terms of the bottom line, or bring up concerns we have. I mean, that's what we do. Sometimes it can be hard to hear if we're putting the brakes on a development project, but you rather hear it now than later when you put it in the market. And I think that's a really big difference, between an order taker and really a development partner, that can save not only all that time, but lots of dollars and lots of samples and failed production runs. And hey, maybe you're like, well, overseas it's super cheap per unit. You can make it a $9.99 t-shirt, but how many bad production runs could you get out of that? All of a sudden it's not so cheap.
And that communication cost, if you're paying yourself or whoever you're paying to communicate. I know so many companies don't work that into their cost, but I wish they would, because I mean, eventually it comes out in the end in the cost, but per unit cost, they're not really working that in. And once you work that in, I know it's creeping up a lot closer to made in the USA prices.
Definitely.
If you look at all of it. Back to the development portion and having a partner, to work with in the U.S. Like you were saying, overseas, they're pretty good at doing exactly what you tell them to do. The difference, especially with our firm, is we're creative. We're into troubleshooting. We're into designing. We're into engineering. We're into that creative problem solving, and we're into finding solutions. And there's a big difference. You don't find too many, if any, overseas factories that are as dedicated to that as we are. And so part of how we do that is with the 4-step process, which we can go into a little bit, but we've developed a process called the Clothier 4 Steps that does that creative troubleshooting and working through problems with you and getting the solutions you want for your garments. But it also, another smart business decision, it also really minimizes your risk when you go into manufacturing, which again is something we're all about. Again, one of my missions is I just don't want inventory or warehouses full of junk, right? So how do we make sure when you go into production and you produce your bulk production run that you're getting a product that is as best as it possibly could be? It's going to fit great, it's going to be constructed great, it's not going to fall apart, it's not going to bleed. It's all these things that are very important to your brand succeeding, and making sure you don't have a warehouse full of junk. So we walk through the 4-step process, and what that is we design first. So it's step 1, and that's where we do all the planning of your product. And then after that, we go into prototyping. So we make a prototype of your garment, and you get to test it. And we get back together and we have meetings discussing, the prototype and how it worked. And then we send it back into prototyping for any tweaks that might need to happen. And we go through that process until it's perfected. We also make one of every size, so we get to make sure everything fits well. And then the third step is tech design, where we really document all the quality control procedures and the parameters for the garment and make sure it's, we're not nobody's skipping any steps and doing things on the cheap, really. We make sure the stitches are correct and the correct stitches per inch and things like that help make sure the garment's going to last a long time. And then, of course, the fourth step is manufacturing. So those are the steps we walk through to help minimize that risk when you get your bulk production run, which again, good reason to make in the U.S., but also a good business decision, helps minimize your risk.